Hello, artists. Today we're going to be using our artwork to explore symmetry. Symmetry is when an object or image can be divided into identical parts. Here we've got an example of a butterfly. We find lots of examples of symmetry in nature. If I imagine drawing a line down the middle of this butterfly, it should be identical on each side. Both of the wings will look the same. It's almost like looking in a mirror. When we have something that can be divided in one line like this and give us two identical pieces, we call that bilateral symmetry. The prefix bi means two, so it's two identical images. Now, if I were to cut the butterfly in half this way, the top wouldn't match the bottom. That's why this is an example of bilateral symmetry, because there's only one spot we can cut it in half and have two identical parts. Now over here we have an example of radial symmetry. If I have something that shows radial symmetry, I can split that image or object in multiple ways and get equal parts. But all of my lines need to share the same central axis. We can kind of imagine this like slices of pie. If this is a circle, each of my little slices of pie should be identical. Here we have a flower that shows radial symmetry because all of the petals are identical and exist around a central point. Today, we're going to be creating snowflakes that showcase that radial symmetry. Now to do that, we're going to be using a pencil and a fresh piece of paper, but there's also a couple other tools that will help us out if you have those available. One is a pair of scissors, although I will show you another method for tearing your paper carefully if you don't have scissors on hand. And the one other thing we're gonna want is something with a hard edge. Today we're gonna be learning about a special process called pencil transfer, and that's gonna involve rubbing our paper really hard at some point. And I usually like to use the edge of a marker to do this because it's got a nice hard edge, but it isn't pointed, so it won't tear through my paper. So I can use the tip or the back, and that'll let me really do some rubbing on the paper without causing any holes or tears. So we're gonna go ahead and get started, but what I notice right now is that the paper I have is a rectangle. I've got two shorter sides and two longer sides. To create something with radial symmetry, it's gonna be a lot easier if I work with a square piece of paper. So I'm gonna have you follow along with me, and we'll look at how we can take this rectangle and turn it into a square. The first thing we're gonna do is some folding. We're gonna make a diagonal fold. So I want you to watch carefully while I do that. I'm gonna hold the paper as still as I can. I'm gonna grab one corner and I'm gonna fold diagonally down to touch the bottom edge. So you can see here's the corner of that paper. I want it to slide along to line up with that bottom edge. Now you'll notice I'm not pressing down yet because I want to make sure everything is lined up correctly. So doing my best to kind of match up those edges. And I'm going to hold it in place with one hand. And what I'm going to do over here is start to press down gently to see if I'm able to fold this corner into a point. I feel like I have it pretty well lined up. I'm going to be able to create that sharp corner. And once I have that, then I can start pressing down. So making sure everything's lined up, then I can start pressing down. And if it's not perfect, that's okay, but I'm gonna get it as best as I can since we're really focused on that radial symmetry today. All right, holding it in place, then smoothing out that fold, creasing the paper. So now your paper should look something like this. We've created this big triangle and we have our edges here lined up with a long diagonal fold. Now our next step is going to be working with this long, skinny rectangle that you'll see we have left over. We want to get rid of that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to flip my paper over like this. I'm going to turn it, and then I'm going to take that bottom part up, and I want to fold so that these edges line up. I've got the edge right here of my triangle, and I'm going to try to line up this part of my paper to fold it and crease it so it lines up. Now what's going to help me do that is if I look here at the corner of that paper, I want to make sure that lines up along the edge of this paper, and then kind of scooch it around until I can see that things are going to crease nicely along that edge. So I will go ahead and press down to make that crease. So now I should have this extra flap. Flipping my paper back over, I should see that where my triangle lines up with that creased edge, that those are pretty much lined up. They don't have to be perfect, but they're pretty close. So now I'm going to take that edge of paper, I'm going to unfold it from the back, fold it back over the top along that same line, because we just made that fold in the paper. I'm going to fold that back over, because this is the part that we're going to want to cut off, this skinny rectangle right here. If I have scissors, I will go ahead and I can cut along this fold to cut off that skinny rectangle. But if I don't have scissors, I can actually keep my paper folded, and I can run my tongue along this edge, and that will create a little bit of moisture in the paper that will let me tear that part of the paper off. Okay, so I'm gonna do the tearing method, and I just put my tongue along that edge. I'm now going to flip my paper over, fold the paper the other way, and do the same thing. I'm gonna carefully put my tongue along that edge. And then I can unfold my paper and tear off this part. Okay, so now you can see that I've unfolded my paper and I've cut or torn off that extra rectangle. I have a nice square. And this is actually the first part of creating my radial symmetry snowflake. We've already folded over diagonally this direction. We're now going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to take this bottom corner, I'm going to fold it up to meet the corner that's across from it. So taking that bottom corner that hasn't been folded yet over to touch the top left corner, lining up the edges before I crease. Then when I'm ready, I'll go ahead and press down, trying to get those sharp corners as best as I can. You can see mine's not perfect, but that's okay. Now I'll open it back up, and I can see I've got 4 matching sections. Now I'm gonna fold my paper top to bottom. So bringing my paper over top to bottom, lining up those edges, and folding. Then I will unfold. So you should be able to see now I've got these 2 parts cut into smaller sections. So I'm gonna fold it one more time. This time I'm gonna fold it side to side, folding it across, bringing my corners to match, creasing when I'm ready. And now I should be able to see that I have 8 radial lines. So remember, we have a central axis when we show radial symmetry. I might go ahead and give you guys a little point there so you can see. And then I have 8 lines coming out from that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's where all my folds are. So now that I have my paper folded into those 8 sections, I'm ready to get started on my snowflake design. But here is the tricky part. Because we're going to be using pencil transfer, I'm actually only going to design one section of my snowflake. Now this can look any way you want, but here's how I'm going to do mine. So how I'll start is by finding that middle point where all of my folds meet. Then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw a line that goes out kind of into the middle of that section, of that little pie slice. You can see I'm not drawing along a fold. Here are my 2 folds. I'm drawing a diagonal line into that space. Now I don't want it to go all the way out to the edge of the paper. I want to make sure that I leave some extra space, and you'll see why in a little bit. But now I have an area where I can start building my snowflake design. You might want to do dashed lines through yours or diagonal lines coming off, but I'm going to draw mine kind of like a crystal shape. I'm going to use points and lots of diagonal lines with these little peaks. Now, as you draw, make sure you don't go outside of those folded edges. You can see right now I'm staying within the lines of my folded section. Now I'm going to bring the edges of my design as far down as I can until they hit right where those folds are. And then I will stop. I can decide if I want to erase any lines or add any extra designs. Okay, so whenever you feel like you are done with the design for this one part of your snowflake, this is where we start talking about the pencil transfer. To get ready for that process, what I need to do is go over all of my lines with my pencil hard. I want hard, dark lines. So I'm gonna press hard and I'm gonna follow along each of the lines that I drew so that I get nice, thick edges on all the lines of my design. Okay, so I've traced over all of my lines with my pencil, nice and dark. Now I'm gonna take my artwork, I'm gonna fold it along that middle line and over like this. Now I can see through my paper, my design that I just drew is right here on this triangle. So this is the back of my design. Here you can see it from the front. I fold it over, and here is that design from the back. Now this is where we're going to transfer the image that I've drawn onto another part of my artwork. And how I do that is by rubbing the back really, really hard. But my fingers are not going to be able to do the job. So that's where I'm going to need something like the edge of a marker to do that rubbing for me. So go ahead and find an item that will let you do that. I'm going to use the edge of my marker, and then I'm gonna press hard against the paper, and I'm gonna start scratching back and forth nice and hard to transfer that image onto another part of my paper. Doing my best to press hard, cover the back of all of my design without ripping through the paper. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open my artwork up and see how it looks. Oh, and you can see my image transferred on to this other part of my paper. But I do see a couple of places that didn't transfer that well, like some areas down here, which means I probably need to either add some more pencil to those areas in my original art, or I need to go over those areas a little harder from the back. So let's see, I'm gonna press a little harder on this area and around here to make sure I get a nice transfer. Opening it back up, and yep, I see I got a lot more of my transfer this time. So now I'm gonna repeat this process, except I'm gonna use my pencil to trace over all of the lines in this new section to darken those up and get those ready to transfer to a new spot on my paper. Now, if there's any spots that you missed, you'll just use your pencil to fill them in. And remember, we want to bring in our lines all the way down to touch the edges of the fold. And when we are bringing these two parts of our snowflake together, we should bring them all the way down to touch. Okay. So now that I've got the second section all filled in with those nice dark pencil marks, I'm gonna be doing the same process, and I'm gonna take this piece of my snowflake and transfer it over onto this section. So I need to follow along the fold that's next door. So that's a diagonal fold. I'm gonna fold that over. And now I'm gonna do that transfer rubbing on the back of that section. If you're not sure which one you're working on, you can just open it back up. Okay, I'm working on this section. The back side of that is right here. So this is where I'm gonna do my rubbing with my marker to get that transfer. Alrighty, let's open it up and take a peek. And yep, I can see that I've got my transfer now on this section of my artwork. So I'm just gonna do the same thing. I'll start going over those lines, bringing down the edges to connect the different parts of my snowflake together. And I'm just gonna keep repeating this process all the way around, retracing with nice dark lines, folding it over to cross on top of the next section, and then using my marker or my hard edge to rub and create that transfer. And I'll keep that process going all the way around until I have a beautiful snowflake. Can't wait to see how these turn out, guys. Have fun.